and Pathway 1 and 2 scholarship funding, we are serving approximately only a third of the 4-year-olds that would meet income eligibility criteria and benefit from a quality pre-K experience. That means close to 100 4-year-olds that would benefit are not getting a quality preschool experience in our community. The question, what strategies and investments do you propose to ensure all children entering kindergarten are ready? Each candidate will have 1 minute with Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Adam. I appreciate you guys hosting this forum tonight. As I mentioned in the auditorium, I carried the legislation to increase early childhood education funding. We were ultimately increased funding by $48 million on this front. It was with great bipartisan support, and I'm happy to have carried that legislation. However, as part of the education package, Governor Dayton had a piece in there that said that was dealing with the voluntary pre-K programming. But instead of the governor putting it into the early childhood education scholarships, like the Republicans proposed, he instead based it off of what your school was. So rather than basing it off of the actual families that need it, he based it off of schools. And why is that a problem? Because right now, 32,000 kids are receiving that assistance in the Minneapolis, St. Paul schools, in the schools that qualify for it. However, 700 of those kids do not meet the income eligibility, but are still getting that. If we were to focus that money on the kids that need it the most, kids like the 100 here in the Wayzata School District would have gotten funding and would have gotten the help that they needed.
Thank you. Deb, next.
Yes. Thank you. So I believe, is this even on?
Yeah.
So I believe that that targeted scholarship funding to our children most at risk of falling behind academically is the best way. So I do have some agreement with my Republican, hopefully future colleague in the legislature. And we know from studies that early childhood education provides a 16% inflation-adjusted return on investment. And according to a presidential report, The Economics of Early Childhood Investment, it is estimated that it could translate into an increase in GDP of nearly 0.5%. So that's gross domestic product. So this is not an expense, this is an investment that pays real economic dividends in economic strength and social cohesion. So I do believe in targeting scholarships to families that most need it, and it shouldn't be dependent on your zip code. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Anderson?
I think everybody agrees that high-quality pre-K leads to kindergarten readiness. Access is important. Most families in Senate District 44 have the ability to choose good programs that they wish, but not all do. And so for me, it's to focus our attention on scholarships for the kids that need it most, the families that need it most. We also need equitable funding for districts who choose to offer programs based on local needs. Can't have the state picking winners and losers like happened this year when Wayzata applied and wasn't able to get the funding. It shouldn't be a competition, and it shouldn't be mandated.
Jenny Cleaborn.
I don't know many of you in this room, but what I'd like you to know about me is that I'm a guardian ad litem for child protection. So I see a lot of children who are in need, and not all of them are economically disadvantaged. So unlike my opponent, I would have supported Bill 2749, and I would have funded the pre-K program that the governor supported. No child should be left out of early pre-K. It's just, we know from the statistics that it reduces crime. It is the best way for a child to start out, and they don't get to pick their parents. So even if they come from very affluent families, it doesn't mean the parent is going to put them in a high-quality pre-K program. Let's keep public education public.
Representative Applebaum.
Is this necessary?
Yeah, I know.
We have a pretty small room and not a lot of time, but anyway, thank you for being here. Thank you, Adam. I co-authored a bill that would have provided universal pre-kindergarten to 47,000 kids throughout Minnesota and would have saved the average Minnesota family $11,000 in childcare costs. That is my belief. I believe that every single 4-year-old deserves to have the type of education that I was lucky enough to receive when I went to Hopkins Public Schools my whole life. And you mentioned, Paul Anderson mentioned that people in our community can afford it. Well, most Minnesotans can't, and we are running for either state representative or state senate. We have to do what's right for everyone, not just focus solely on our own situation or what may be best for our neighbors and community members. So I'll continue to support a universal approach. I think every kid deserves an opportunity to be successful regardless of how much money their parents make.
Patty Meyer?
I think that every child should be ready for kindergarten, and I also know that the best teacher in early ages are your parents, and I think the parents need to spend more time with the children and help them to get ready. Now, we have situations where we have parents that aren't familiar with our education system, and maybe that's something where the school districts can work together with the community to help educate the community on how important it is to get your child ready for kindergarten. I think the scholarship program is an excellent idea for the kids that are in need, and I think we need to make sure these kids, because if they're not ready in kindergarten, they're going to fall behind right from the start.
And I think the best way to deal with this is to fund our schools at the level that they need to be funded. If we write a mandate in a piece of legislation, we need to also fund that mandate. And as Deb mentioned earlier, we need to talk to our federal representatives and our federal senators and say, show me the money. We need the money. But what I want you to know is that in 2015 and 2016, because the current legislature has underfunded our schools, we have had to increase our class size by 1. And in 2016 and 2017, we've had to make up $1 million. And it pits one family against another. It's the legislator's job to fund the schools.
Thank you. The next is Paul Anderson.
Well, for me, let's align services required with funding provided so subsidies aren't needed. We've got a situation where the federal government passed IDEA back in 1975 and has never fulfilled their obligation. That's a serious, serious problem. The state has put mandates on the school districts and they're not fulfilling. So you've got a situation where Chair McCullough and Dr. Anderson and the school board are fighting for or saving a gap, putting 7.5% of their general fund into special education to make up the gap. That's unfortunate and it's not okay. So the federal government and the state has to fill those gaps. We can't have unfunded mandates. And we also need to identify as best we can the learning differences earlier so we can provide interventions faster and more effectively.
Patty Meyer.
We've done a lot of talking tonight about special education, and I think we all agree that it's an important need in the school districts, and the students are special people that need to be educated also. Now, I think whoever gets elected here, I hope whoever it is, does something about this with the feds. I mean, maybe get them involved and maybe lead the coalition with the other legislators in St. Paul to put some pressure back on Washington to get some money. We're not going to get our full 40% probably out of them, but let's get something out of them and keep putting the pressure on them. And I think we talked about these unfunded mandates. Again, we need to do something about that because there seems to be inequality in funding for all sorts of school needs.
Thank you. Representative Apple.
Thank you. Well, like many people have said before, IDEA is woefully underfunded, and that consequently puts pressures on the state government, and that puts pressures on local school districts to make up the difference. I can assure you that if reelected, I will not support a budget that doesn't reduce the need for special education cross subsidies by at least 25%. In speaking with members of the Wayzata education community, Hopkins, Minnetonka, it seems to be generally advocated for that. That's a priority for this district, and it's not only better for special education students and teachers, but every single student, teacher, staff member in the public school system. So I can promise you that, and look forward to continue to work on this issue. Thanks.
Deb Calvert.
Sorry.
So as the mother of an inclusion specialist and the daughter of a former special education teacher, I can say that as part of our constitutional mandate to support a public education system that is quality, I fully support talking to our federal legislators and putting some pressure on them to fund part of their obligation, even if it's just a part of it. So 85% of the remainder, 85% of the remainder of the 60% is the state's obligation. We have to start putting our money where our mouth is because, as Ginny said, we are supposed to be supporting all of our children and helping them reach their full potential. I also think that the state government should be adding money on the formula, because the reason I got involved in public schools is because they had received no funding for several years in 2003, and we are still crawling out of that deficit. So giving money on the formula that gives school districts the flexibility to meet the needs of all students according to the needs of the individual school districts is another solution.
Anderson.
I mentioned a little bit in the auditorium what we're doing on special education funding. And there's kind of three things that we need to address. As everybody here at the table, I think all agrees, we need to make sure that the federal government is trying to fund their obligation of the 40%. On top of that, the state needs to step up to the plate too and provide more funding on special education so the schools aren't doing the cross-subsidy. But the third thing, and this is something that we actually were able to achieve here in this last legislative session, we reduced the paperwork for special education funding by for special education by 50%. And what that means is it's getting rid of some of the mandates that are unnecessary, that just make it more difficult for our school districts to do special education for our kids. And that, I think, is really huge. It was something that special education educators came to the Capitol and said, we would like to see a reduction in paperwork because they spend so much time on just that alone. But on top of that, we need to be reaching out to our special educators too and see what are some other things that we need to do, what are some mandates that are on the state level that we need to eliminate that still give quality education to special needs students, but also makes it so that it's not so onerous for them to be providing the services that they do to the students.
All right, thank you. So at this time, we're going to have the questions from the audience, and if you haven't already given your note cards to either Cheryl or Brian, looks like there's some back that they're consolidating. I know there's one question right now that I've received during the first two questions. And the question is, there were several questions actually asked on this topic, and it's been consolidated down to this one. Do you believe creationism should be taught in the public school science classrooms? And while it comes across a yes or no question, if you could elaborate on your position, that would be great. And we will begin with Representative Applebaum.
Thank you. It's a yes or no question, so I'll answer it simply. I absolutely do not believe that creationism should be taught in our public school system, period. We have a separation of church and state in this country, and if creationism if someone wants to teach creationism in schools, they can do it in a parochial school or other sort of private religious institution. But in public schools in the United States and Minnesota, creationism cannot and should not be taught.
Okay, thank you. Patty Meyer?
I'm going to agree with John. I don't think it should be taught in the public schools. I think it's something that can be taught in the private schools or at home or through the churches.
Representative Anderson?
I don't think that the state should be dictating to the school district's curriculum like that. That's up to the local school district, that's up to the local parents and students that are involved in the community if that's something that they want to do. But I'm certainly not going to be advocating for it at the legislature.
Deb Calvert?
I believe in science, and I believe in the separation of church and state, and I would oppose teaching intelligent design, otherwise known as creationism, in schools. That has a place, and if you would like to teach it, you may teach it in a private religious school or a private school, but it has no place in public education.
Paul Anderson?
I agree with Representative Anderson. This is a local control issue, but I have no expectation or don't believe that it should be taught in schools.
And finally, Julie Cleveland?
No, I would not support that. I agree with John Applebaum's answer. If you want to do that in a religious school, fine, but not in your public school.
All right, thank you. The next question is, and I've also been told since doesn't seem like we have a lot of questions, you're free to elaborate on your answer a little more and go a minute 30 if you want. So this next question is, would you support private school vouchers? Why or why not? And we will start with Deb Calvert.
I don't support private school vouchers because, first of all, I think that it shouldn't matter where you go to school. I also think that vouchers, along with some other school choice issues, give a false choice to parents who are already struggling with income, that they can attend private school, which may be beyond their means. And I think it's more important for us to fund our schools adequately, to provide great schools in every community. And I think it's just a way of diverting public school dollars into private school coffers.
Thank you. Representative Anderson?
No, I don't. I think that when it comes to the issue of education, I would rather see us focus on making sure that parents have the tools that they need to supplement their child's education. So I've been a co-author in carried legislation to expand the K-12 education tax credit and deduction in the state of Minnesota. And what that does is it allows parents to be able to either buy a computer or other equipment that helps supplement the education of their child and get a tax credit for it. Now, I know my opponent is not a real fan of that. She's lobbied, hopefully that's okay for me to say, she's lobbied me quite extensively to get rid of expenditures, tax expenditures on this level. But I will tell you, it's an important tool for our school parents. I've also authored legislation that would expand that to pre-K, so for parents that are buying books and things of that nature to help their child even at that level. I think it's an important tool for them to have, and the more that we can do to support parents, to support their schools, I think it's a good collaboration.
All right, thank you. Jenny Cleveland?
Without sounding catty, and I know when I say that I should probably not make the statement, I'm glad you finally answered my question. I have lobbied extensively to stop tax expenditures, which is $15 billion spending in the tax code as opposed to in the budget where you can see it more readily and more easily. I believe that those emails went out to you several years ago, so I'm glad to finally have an answer for that. The question is about vouchers. I do not believe in school vouchers. I believe in excellent public education for all students. I believe in equal education for all students. That's my choice.
All right, thank you. Paul Anderson?
Well, we're very fortunate to have an incredible school district here in Wayzata and in Senate District 44, where we're all trying to be elected to. We've got 5 school districts that Deb and I are raising for. I do believe in choices for families. I do believe in expanding the tax credit. But the biggest thing that can be contentious with regards to the current governor, he's not going to support it. What I do strongly support are school opportunity scholarships for those who desperately need it and need opportunities to get to schools that will help them achieve. And this goes to the opportunity issue as well.
Thank you. Patty Meyer.
I believe that it's the family's choice, the parents' choice to select where they want to have their children educated, and that's why we do have public schools, private schools, religious schools, charter schools. We have lots of opportunities for parents to make those decisions, and even within the public school, we have online classes and things that they can partake in. So I think it's a parental choice what to do with their children. I'm not pro vouchers. If we've got extra money to be spending on that, I think we could spend it on some other needs of school districts. And I too want the children to be educated properly, but I think vouchers is not the way.
Thank you, and then Representative Applebaum.
I think school vouchers have the effect of weakening our public school system, so I will not and will never support them.
All right, thank you. All right, next question is a bit of a two-part. Do you have what is your opinion, or do you have a position on teachers' union and teacher tenure? If you do have a position, what is it? You will begin with Paul Anderson.
So my opinion on teacher unions?
And teacher tenure.
Okay.
Teacher tenure.
Well, let's jump to teacher tenure. I think this is an important issue for school districts to work on. This is when you're in an industry that we are looking for the best teachers regardless. We're looking for the best teachers in each classroom for our kids. We're looking for a diversity in teachers of color. If you have a teacher tenure situation where you're penalizing or removing teachers that are last in, first out, I don't believe that's a good situation. So I certainly appreciate the history in this, and I appreciate the teacher union and they representing the teachers that are doing an amazing job. I'm a product of the Wayzata schools, but I think we need to move into a more present-day form of tenure.
All right, thank you. Jenny Cleaborn.
I do support teachers' unions. I believe unions allow for democracy in the workplace, and I do believe that they balance power. As a mediator, I participate in many negotiations and many union and management conversations. And I firmly support unions. As far as tenure is concerned, I believe tenure allows a teacher an opportunity to advocate for the needs of the student. And by the protection of tenure, they can push administration to do their jobs better. There are always opportunities to remove an inadequate teacher through proper administrative procedures. So to that, I would say yes, I support tenure, and yes, I support teacher unions.
Okay, thank you. Representative Applebaum.
Well, I support teachers' unions and unions of any kind that allow people to come together, collectively organize and bargain for what's in the best interests of themselves and of the people that they are serving in their profession. I think that teacher tenure has its faults. You know, you're going to hear some things about a last in, first out, and people on the other side of the aisle are very ready to say that that's exactly how it's done. I don't agree that it is. In my 2 years as a representative, I've spoken to countless individuals in the education community. Bad teachers, so to speak, are always going to go. The tenure doesn't protect them against all faults. And we need to have a system that encourages the very best and most qualified people to want to be a teacher and enter one of the most, if not the very most the most important profession that we have in this society. So whether it's a tweak on the tenure system, having it as it is, I'm not sure, but we have to continue to do everything we can to ensure that teachers are in the best position possible to succeed, that smart people continue to want to enter such a wonderful profession, and that the kids in our future are in a better position to face the workforce than those today. So there we go.
Thank you. Patty Meyer?
As far as teacher tenure, I think we need to do some changes there too. I'm kind of in the reform and change things. I think people in the business community look at that and they say, well, we have standards and we have achievements that we expect our employees to do, so I think we should expect that from our teachers. I think most teachers are great. I think most teachers do an excellent job in teaching our kids. I mean, the kids love their teachers, the parents love their teachers, and I think that's the way it should be. But I think teachers in any industry, if you're just the same year of experience for 25 years, isn't good. You need to be growing and expanding and doing the best possible job you can. As far as teacher unions go, there's always been unions in all sorts of industries, and so we have that one. I think if we looked at the morning paper, we know that they're raising up money and they're helping our DFL friends at this table. So I hope they do some good things for the teachers too.
Thank you. Representative Anderson?
Thank you. And I just want to say Adam has been a great resource for me. He has done great communication on the needs of the teachers union at the Capitol when we've addressed issues that are specific to teachers' professionalism. On top of that, his predecessor, Jody, was very good too, great communicator with me. So I feel very blessed that from the Wayzata School District, the teachers union has had a very open door and has been willing to share their thoughts on education policy overall. As you all know, because I mentioned in the auditorium earlier, my husband Paul is a school teacher. He teaches physics. He used to do contract negotiations in a past life. Unfortunately, he doesn't have to do that anymore. So I hear from him the perspective of a teacher engaged and involved in a teachers union as well. But I do want to talk about the last in, first out that Representative Applebaum had mentioned earlier. And the reason that this is a concern for me and why we need to eliminate this is imagine that you have 3 very qualified candidates, and one candidate is hired at 1 o'clock, the second candidate is hired at 1:05, and the third candidate is hired at 1:10. When it comes time for a school district, if they unfortunately have to lay off somebody, they have to lay off the person that was hired at 1:10, not based upon their qualifications, not based upon the needs of the school district, but because they were the last person hired. This is why we need to change last in, first out. It's a bad policy. It doesn't set our schools up to be successful, and I would hope that everybody supports it.
And Deb Calvert?
So I'll start with the union relationship. I had a wonderful discussion with Superintendent Anderson yesterday, and I asked him about the relationship with the union here in this school district, and I know it's the same in the Hopkins School District. They are our partners. These are our professionals who know what we need in the classroom. So I view the teachers union as a partner, and I believe that tenure has a place, because my mom was her teachers union rep for some time, and she was a school psychologist who would have to advocate for some unpopular views for her special education, her students with special needs as a special education teacher. And we want our teachers to speak freely, to advocate for our children without retaliation. So I believe that our unions have a place. And in talking to Superintendent Anderson, he said they've been wonderful partners and understand in lean times that they have to tighten their belts along with the rest of us. So I don't see them as adversaries, I see them as partners. We are grappling with the problem of recruiting and retaining teachers of color to help close the achievement gap. It's something that I did talk with people in the teachers union in admin, and it is something that we have to start working on. I know that in terms of removing bad teachers, there's a TD&E law from 2011 that simply needs to be enforced, and we don't need to change the tenure law regarding removal of poor teachers.
All right, thank you. One more question, and then we will move to closing statements from each of the candidates. The last question is, which state laws regarding public education do you feel are effective and should continue? And what do you feel needs to be reformed, and what would that reform look like? We will begin with Patty Meyer.
Well, first of all, the Constitution of the state of Minnesota says we have to fund education and do it well. So I think that's a #1 item that we need to keep on the books and keep following through on that. Some of the laws too, I'm not 100% sure on all of them, to be honest with you, but I think there's some things perhaps with the testing that's been an issue as far as standard testing and the reading and math grade level testing. I think we need to test our children and make sure that the results that we get, we use them wisely and take the best practices from that and move forward. I think there's some rules as far as bullying. Would that be one of the state laws too? I think bullying is an issue that we need to stay on top of. It's not good for the children that are the victims or the child that is doing it. So I think those are some of the items we should stay with.
All right, thank you. Representative Applebaum.
Thank you. One state law that I think is particularly helpful when it comes to public education is the fact that teachers and students can't come to school with firearms. And I think you would all be very surprised to know, those watching it at home, I don't know if the Trump-Clinton debate or this will get better ratings, but if anyone is watching this, I would encourage everyone to view the Hopkins LAC event, because you will be disappointed to know that not everyone on this panel feels the same way when it comes to safety in our schools. I think it's absolutely outrageous that people could think that school teachers and students should be allowed to carry firearms in our public schools. So I think that law should stay, and any requirements and regulations related to should stay. As far as things we should be doing better, we have to fully fund education. You've heard all night about how we have unfunded and underfunded mandates, and even when we provided enough resources to make some people happy and not result in layoffs, it still wasn't enough to completely preclude people losing their jobs and larger class sizes and overall a worse learning environment for kids. So we have to fully fund education at all levels.
All right, thank you. Deb Calvert.
There are many requirements of our schools, but the #1 requirement of our state is a constitutional mandate to provide quality public education. It is in our Constitution. It's one of 2 constitutional mandates: education and transportation. I believe that we need to provide a fair and equitable education statewide. So there have been efforts to recreate the Minnesota Miracle, and we have to be very deliberate about how we go about that kind of effort, because there are always winners and losers, and we have to make sure that our investments are fair and equitable statewide. There are issues having to do with integration.
Struggling, or if you live in Minneapolis or you live in Duluth, if you are struggling, you should be able to have access to the early learning scholarships that we have.
Thank you. Jenny Cleaborn.
In 44A, we have 3 school districts. We have Osseo, Robbinsdale, and Wayzata. I think the most important thing that we can do is fund our schools in an equitable way, based on the needs of the community, and have a formula that allows for fair and equitable education. From pre-K through post-secondary, we need good, adequate funding for education. Currently, Wayzata is doing pretty well. We've had extensive population growth, and it's allowed us to not have the cuts that other cities have faced. However, in Plymouth, the quality of your education does depend on your zip code. According to a New York Times report, if you are fortunate and your parents bought a home in the Wayzata district or open enrolled you at some point in time, you are working at a 2.4 grade level ahead of national norm. If you live in Robbinsdale, you are at 0.25 below the national norm. If you are in Osseo, you're at 0.3, just above the national norm. In Plymouth, education should not depend on your zip code. Fully funding our schools is critical, and for that I say we must do that and stop unfunded mandates.
Thank you, Paul.
Well, I do appreciate the accountability benchmarks, which include the Ready for K and rating by third grade, math by eighth grade, and college and career readiness graduation. With regards to reform, as I talked about earlier, with regards to the funding formula, it just is, it's too confusing. It's not helpful to school districts like Wayzata, who need to have their hands untied, and we need to have more local control where we can have, again, Chair McCullough and others manage these funds better than the state telling us how to do it.
All right, thank you. And at this portion of the program, we're going to be, Deb Calvert, you can begin with closing remarks and just pass the mic down to your right.
All right. Education is one of two constitutionally mandated functions of government, as I mentioned recently, and it is our economic engine. Our educated workforce is what attracts and retains our major employers, and it's why CNBC named Minnesota the #1 state in which to do business. I joined the Hopkins LAC in 2003 when schools were just beginning to suffer from state cuts and shifts, and stayed engaged as it got serious enough to affect credit ratings. I want to take my passion for kids and schools to the state senate to make sure every child has a chance to reach their full potential. Thank you.
Well, as I said in the introductory remarks, this is personal for me. This was my high school. I met my wife not 500 feet from here for the first time and fell in love with her. This is where my kids will graduate from high school. The passion that I've been filled with from educators and coaches here at Wayzata is what I've pulled into both the private sector and in public life in various volunteer efforts. But the biggest passion I have right now is to go serve the people of Senate District 44 in St. Paul. Be an advocate, be a champion, be a partner with Wayzata Schools, and make sure we're getting things done for this incredible school district.
And my name is Ginny Cleaborn, and I'm running for this seat because I believe in 2017 our children deserve an opportunity to be creative and innovative. I spoke with one of our administrators and I asked this question, and this is the question I want you to take away with you today. When we talk about school funding, what could we have achieved with all of these students who have been going to school for the last 12 years with unfunded schools? What creativity have we lost? What innovation didn't occur? When I asked the administrator today to say, what could we have done? And this administrator said to me, Ginny, that's a great question. We've been so focused on not cutting our core curriculum that we haven't even had time to think about what could have been possible. This is an entire educational life of a child. 12 years of underfunding schools in Wayzata and across our state. So I'm asking you to think about who you elect next and to think about the opportunities that we could be missing in innovation and creativity and sparking a child for a life of achievement. Thank you.
First, I just want to thank the Wayzata School Board and the LAC for hosting this event tonight. I always appreciate seeing so many people engaged and involved and wanting to do good for our kids. So thanks for all the participants and everybody else involved in this process. As I mentioned earlier, my focus at the legislature has been on making sure that we can help kids that are at risk with the early learning scholarship funding that I carry. I've also been a huge advocate for literacy funding as well, and making sure we fully fund all-day kindergarten, which I did vote for. And I also want to highlight a couple of things too about my background that I didn't mention earlier. Prior to serving in the legislature, I served on the Plymouth Planning Commission, and I was the liaison for the Park and Rec board that they have too. I have had my work recognized by several entities, the Aspen Institute, I'm a Liddell Fellow, and that's being recognized for working across the party lines. And so I'm involved in that. I've also received different awards from many different organizations. The Zone, it's a Jewish Hunger Solution organization in particular for a couple of things. My work on making sure that families that need have access to healthy foods. And also sponsoring legislation to make sure that kids don't go hungry at school and that they can focus on schoolwork and not about eating, which you wouldn't think that kids would have to do that, but that's a problem. It's a real issue, even in Plymouth. So appreciate again that you had me here tonight and look forward to any questions that you have later. Thank you.
I too would like to thank all of you in the audience tonight for coming out tonight. It shows that you do care about education and the schools in this district. And thank you to the LAC for putting this on. In closing, I want to say that our nation has become the strongest, the most educated, and the most prosperous country in the world. And that's because our society values education. Our teachers and our students are dedicated, motivated, and inspired to succeed. And succeed they must, often in spite of the fact that sometimes there's education systems put roadblocks along their road to success. These roadblocks may be financial, institutional, historical. In the end, it doesn't matter. The system needs to continue, as I've said before, to reform, to keep current, to keep fresh, and to stay relevant in what's needed to educate our children. It's not enough to keep doing what we've done in the past. It fails our students because our students today are ready, willing, and capable of facing the challenges of the 21st century. Our best decision makers, I feel, are our teachers, our administrators, our school board members, our parents, and concerned citizens. The question is, are we as policymakers ready to accept change to the system? I am, and I hope you'll join me in those efforts. Our kids deserve no less, and that is why I'm running for the next generation.
Thank you. Thank you again, Adam, and the Wayzata School Board, Wayzata Legislative Action Committee for your efforts in hosting this event tonight. It's always well attended. Well, always, I've been here twice, but both times it's been well attended, and I enjoy visiting with both new and familiar people here. You know, I am a member of the next generation, and it's been an honor to serve my hometown district at the Capitol over the last 2 years. I promise you, as I did 2 years ago, and you rewarded me by believing in me, some of you on 2 occasions at the primary and then the general election, I promise you there's not going to be anyone who works harder for the best interests of our kids at the legislature than I will. I've demonstrated that over the past 2 years, and I will continue to go to bat for our kids every single day I'm elected. I really appreciate your continued trust in me, and if you need anything, you want to actually learn about how I vote instead of how I say I voted, please visit my website, johnapplebaum.org, and I encourage anyone watching this who has incumbents in the race to actually do your homework and see how they have voted, because you'll find, and I'm new to politics, but what people say and what people do are often very different. I'm not that type of a person, I'm not that type of a problem solver or leader, and that's what I'll continue to bring to the table as your state representative. Thank you.
All right, I want to thank each of the candidates again for taking time out of what is likely busy schedules to join us at this very important event. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to learn more about each of you and your positions on education. I also want to thank the audience for your attendance tonight, and if you have any questions or